Let's knit the life-size Chubby doll. Hey, it's Denise from LoomaHat.com. For a list of supplies and more information, be sure to visit the website at LoomaHat.com/Chubby. And we begin with a drawstring cast on of 20 pegs. We're going to be using 2 strands of worsted weight yarn, and I'm using just a color off and a 41 peg loom. I'm going to secure the yarn with a basic knot. You can use a slip knot if you're more comfortable. And then I'm going to knit from right to left. You can knit from left to right. And we're going to take the working yarn behind that first peg and then in front of the next one. And you're going to zigzag with the working yarn through all of your pegs until you reach peg 20. And once you're there, keep in mind that we're going to be knitting flat. So we're going to take the working yarn and turn around on peg 20. Bring it behind that peg 20 and bring it in front of the next one, and then take that working yarn and you're going to lay it flat over the rest of your pegs. And if you notice, there are some pegs with 2 strands on top and 2 on the bottom. You're going to knit off the pegs that have 2 on the front, on top, and 2 on the bottom. Just take those 2 from the bottom and knit off. All right, then you're going to go to the next peg that has 2 loops. Remember that we're knitting with 2 strands as one, so it has bottom loops and top loops. Take the bottom loops over the top and knit off, and continue to do that until you get back to the beginning of the loom. You're just knitting off basically every other peg, and when you get to peg 2, you knit off, and you'll notice that peg 1 does not have bottom loops and tops. So that one you're going to leave as is, and you're going to turn around because again we're knitting flat. And now we're going to knit rows 1 through 35, and this is going to be the only time you're going to skip peg 1, right? You can't knit that peg because there aren't top and bottom loops. So you turn around and you start with peg 2 and you knit off that peg. And now you're going to knit all of your pegs. And I'm using the U-wrap version of the knit stitch. So you half wrap your peg and then take the bottom over the top and knit off. And you can use the flat version of the knit stitch if you like. Please don't use the E-wrap. It's just not the right stitch for this project. And when I say all your pegs, you know I mean up to peg 20. And you're going to continue to go back and forth. You don't skip any pegs, back and forth until you have done 35 rows. All right, keep knitting. By the way, I just wanted to give you a heads up. When you knit off peg 19 right here, you see it looks kind of funky like that. No worries, just bring the yarn forward, knit off, and it'll be fine. And that will be the last time it does that. You'll knit just regular from this point on. So remember, you need 35 rows, so just keep knitting back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Don't forget to remove the knot from the anchor peg after you knit a few rows. Once you finish knitting those 35 rows, you're going to get your scissors and first measure out about 3 to 4 inches. I actually made mine a little too short, and cut the working yarn. And then you want to create some form of a knot in order to secure these loose strands. I'm just going to make a basic knot and use that peg right there, peg number 1. And now go ahead and get your working yarn again. We're going to work the second leg, and just like the first one, we're knitting 35 rows of 20 pegs. So I'm going to secure the yarn to the anchor peg, and then I'm going to do the drawstring cast on again, just on the other side of the loom. So take the working yarn, you're going to zigzag till you get to 20 pegs, and you'll have an extra peg. It's okay, it stays empty. So when you get to peg 20, you turn around and lay the working yarn loosely over the rest of the pegs, and you're going to knit off every peg that has a top and bottom loop, right? So take the bottom loop over the top and knit off, just like you did with the first leg. You're going to do the same exact things, just on the other side of your loom. So once you finish your cast on, just like before, that first peg does not have 2 loops, right? So you're going to skip it. You're just going to take your working yarn and you're going to turn around and go in the opposite direction. You're going to knit off those 19 pegs and then turn around and you're going to knit all 20 of them. All right, you need 35 rows. Once you're done knitting those 35 rows, you're done with your second leg, and we're going to be knitting in the round now to connect that front and back part here. And so we're going to knit the torso area in the round, and we're going to start our rows all over again. We're going to start the count again. So we're going to knit 40 rows using 41 pegs. And to do that, undo the knot from that peg 1 that you cut, and then take it and you're going to wrap it around the strands that you were using to create a nice tight knot. So I wrap the cut strands around the one that I'm working with, and then I create a knot. Then I'm going to split the yarns to make 2 more knots. You can just make another knot if you're more comfortable. I feel more secure with this. And now those 2 sides are connected, and I'm going to start doing the U-wrap knit stitch again. So half wrap, knit off, and keep going. Once you reach the back side of the loom, right, you knit peg 19. You're going to find that empty peg, and so we're going to cast on that empty peg with a yarn over. So double wrap that peg, which is peg 21, and knit off. And now you're connected. All you're going to do is go to the next peg and start again with your U-wrap or flat stitch. And now that side is connected. See, all your pegs have a loop on them, and then you're just gonna keep knitting. So your back side is connected, your front side is connected, and now you can knit in the round. Once you get to peg 41, that's row 1, and now just keep knitting. 2 things to remember: you're knitting in the round, so you're going around in a circle, right, not back and forth, and you need 40 rows. So here I am starting row 2. I have a marker on my peg 1, so every time I reach that peg 1 that has a marker, I've done a row. You're going to need 40. Once you're done knitting those 40 rows, you're ready to move to the head portion of the doll. So you need to change color, and we're going to do 35 rows of 41 pegs each. So grab your yarn and your scissors, go ahead and cut your working yarn. And again, you're doing 2 to 3 inches, and bring now your 2 strands of skin tone color, and we're going to connect them. So again, you're going to wrap the new strands to the old one and get them as tight and as close to the peg as you can. And then we're going to go ahead and make a knot, and you can make any kind of knot that works for you. I'm going to go ahead and just do a very simple knot, and then if some of you want to, you can also work this in when you knit. I don't like to do that, so I just leave it there. And when I was telling you about just doing another simple knot instead of splitting the two, once you've got it nice and tight and close to the peg, this is what I meant. You can just go ahead and do another knot like the first one. Normally I would have just split them and done two separate knots, but this will work as well. I just find that it doesn't work as well, right? And then all you're going to do at this point is that you start knitting, because you need 35 rows. So just like before, I'm going to use the U-wrap version of the knit stitch, and I continue to knit in the round. Once you finish those 35 rounds, you're ready for your bind off, and we're going to do the flat drawstring hacked version. So get your working yarn, and you're going to go around your loom one full turn plus a few, like 6 or 7 pegs length, and then get a pair of scissors, cut that working yarn, and then get your hook or a needle. If you're going to use a hook, you're going to put your working yarn under the first loop and take your hook to scoop it up and feed it through that loop. You're going to take the working yarn behind the next peg, which is peg 2, bring it in front of 3, and from the top with your hook, you're going to scoop up and feed the yarn through. Go to the next peg, which is 4, go behind it and in front of peg 5, and from the top, scoop it up and feed it through the loop. So you're basically going every other peg, right? It's a drawstring, flat drawstring, which is basically the way you're going to take it off the same way you put it on. So you can just take off the loops in the meantime from the ones that have yarn that's been fed through them, if you find that you don't have enough working yarn as you're getting closer to the front of the loop. The front of the loom. You can start removing the loops off the pegs. And then you're going to get to peg 41, and that's going to be the last one that you're going to feed the working yarn through it. And then just like you did peg 1, you're going to do all the other pegs that have the working yarn that has been fed through it. So again, it's every other peg that you're going to remove the loop from, right? And it's going to leave you every other peg with a loop still on it. So go ahead and remove those that have yarn, and then we're going to do the second part to this. Personally, I like to leave the last one with the yarn still through it. Not necessary. It's just I feel more secure that way. So I leave that there and get a single strand then of that color tone and secure it to the anchor peg. I'm going to use a basic knot, but you can use a slip knot. And now it's secured to the anchor peg. This is a double, this is a single, and it's going to be easier for me to distinguish from the other. Go ahead and wrap it around your loom just like you did before. You're going to wrap that working yarn around at least one full turn plus a little bit of extra yarn. So you then get your scissors, cut that working yarn, and just like before, you're going to feed that yarn through the existing loops. And again, it's every other peg that still has a loop. And if you're using a needle to do this, then you are going to come in from the bottom of the loop instead of from the top like you're doing with the hook, right? You put your needle through the bottom and go upward, and then just feed the yarn through the loops. Once you're done doing that with the loops that are left on, then take your hook and remove those loops off the pegs. Just like before, it's every other loop. Every other peg. Very important, I do want to take a quick moment and say thank you to Carol from PromiseLearningATL.com, Clarissa, and Penny for covering the cost of closed captioning this video. Thanks, guys. Once you take off that last loop from the single strand, I like to take this double strand here, the 2, and make a knot just so I can distinguish one set from the other. This is going to help later, and I'll show you how. Then you can take that loop as well as the one off the anchor peg. And now what you need to do is stretch these stitches, because that fabric is not going to look right if you don't stretch your stitches. And you can see how having the two shades of the yarn has a really nice kind of shiny look to it. If you want to do that as well. All right, you're going to put this part aside, and now we're going to work on the next part, which is going to be the hands and arms. So you're going to drawstring cast on 16 pegs. This piece is made up of two parts, and we're going to start with the hand, which we will be using a skin tone color to do 6 rows of 16 pegs. So I'm using only a single strand because I want the arm to be super soft and it doesn't need 2 strands, but you can do that if you want. I'm going to secure that strand to my anchor peg using a simple knot. You can use a slip knot, and then take the working yarn behind peg 1 in front of peg 2, and then you're going to zigzag those 16 pegs with your working yarn. And once you get to peg 16, you're going to turn around behind peg 16 and in front of peg 15, and then lay that working yarn loosely over the next few pegs. And you're going to knit off every peg that has 2 loops. You remember this, right? This is the drawstring cast on. And we're doing that for 16 pegs to start the hand portion of our arm. And so once you have cast on those 16 pegs, and remember, I'm using 1 strand. You can use 2 if you're better with that. Once I get back to peg 1, it only has 1 loop, and so I skip it this time, and I turn around, and I'm going to now knit the rest of the pegs, and on the way back, I'm going to knit all 16 pegs, and we need 6 rows for the hand of this skin tone color. So remember, you're knitting flat, so back and forth for 6 row in skin color yarn. And then we're going to get to the next part of this piece. Next, we're going to be working the sleeve or arm, and for this you can use your color of choice. And we're going to complete 36 rows. So in my case, I did those 6 in a color, in the skin tone color. I'm going to bring in yellow yarn because I do want a sleeve. So I'm going to get my scissors and cut this skin tone color, bring my yellow yarn, and just like I've connected colors before, I'm going to wrap the new one around the old one and make a basic knot. In fact, I'm going to make 2 knots. You can use whatever method you want to use to connect your colors, or you could just leave your skin color and it's going to give you a sleeveless look, right? And again, I'm going to be using the U-wrap version of the knit stitch. You can use the flat. In fact, that might be a better option because you do want your stitches to be nice and tight, so that your stuffing doesn't show through. And then remember that we're wanting 36 rows in total, and it should look like this. At that point, we're ready to do the bind off. And so I'm going to take the working yarn and lay it across all of the pegs, including a few extra ones, and then bring my scissors and cut the working yarn. And I'm going to bring in my edges. You don't need to do this on my first and last peg. I'm going to take the loop off peg 16 and move it over to 15 and knit off. And then I'm going to do the same with peg 1. I'm going to take that loop off of peg 1 and bring it over to peg 2 and knit off. It's just going to kind of round off this piece on the top. You don't need to do this, by the way, okay? You can just leave them all. And then with my hook, I'm going to feed that working yarn through every loop. This is a drawstring, and it's done a little differently in that you're going to feed the working yarn through every loop in order to bind off. All right. And then once you've taken that working yarn and there is yarn on every single loop, you can then take the loops off the pegs, and your fabric then at that point is off your loom. And now you need to stretch those stitches, because remember, if you don't, your fabric would look mighty funky. It's just not going to work. So make sure that you do that you stretch your stitches really nicely, and then you're going to pull the drawstring to close the top and bottom, and that will create a tube. See that? That is your arm, and in my case it has two colors, so you can distinguish the hand from the sleeve. And then I'm going to just make sure that it curls nice in and creates that tube. And then I'm going to get a needle to sew the two sides together. Okay, before I do that, we have to make one more part though, which is the ears. And we're going to do them skin tone. You need 8 pegs, and we're going to do 5 rows. So get your yarn, and as always, we're going to connect it to the anchor peg, and then you're going to drawstring cast on 8 pegs. And you already know how to do this because we're experts here. You're going to turn around, because we're knitting flat, lay the working yarn over your pegs, and you're going to knit off every peg that has 2 loops, and that's going to be your cast on, right? Remember, one does not have 2 loops, so for this one row you're going to skip peg 1. You're going to turn around, because again we're knitting flat, and we're still using the U-wrap version of the knit stitch, so half wrap and knit off, or you can use the flat version again because it's a nice tighter stitch. And once you finish your 5 rows, you're going to do, you know, the drawstring cast off. So again, once you've done those 5 rows, you're going to take the working yarn and lay it across those 8 pegs, including a few, and then cut. That's going to give you enough string to do the cast off, and then just feed that loose strand through all of your loops, right? All 8 of them. And then once you are done feeding the yarn through the loops, then you can go ahead and take the knot off the anchor peg and take all the loops off those 8 pegs and free your fabric from the loom. You need to stretch those stitches because of course they look mighty odd, and pull on those cast on and cast off drawstrings in order to start shaping your ear. And you'll notice that the loops on the cast off and the cast on are a bit loose, so we want to shape this so the ear looks nice and neat and well done. So we're going to take a needle, first cut off the excess yarn of course, and then get your needle. Make sure you left a long string, and with the needle you're going to go beneath those cast on loops that are kind of loose, so the next row down, and you're going to feed the working yarn through those bottom loops, and then you're going to come up the side loops. And sorry for a little bit of that background noise, it happens. And again, come through the side of your ear and over to the top. And again, these loops are pretty loose, so you can go straight through them with your yarn, and then you still see that a few of them are loose. So come up the side again. You're basically going side, up, over, and then side again, until you notice that the ear looks a lot neater and there aren't a bunch of really wide and loose strands, right? You want a nice rounded corners and clean edges. You're gonna sew one end to the head of the doll, so one end, it's not a big deal that it's not as tight as you would like it, because anyway you could just take that end and use that end to attach the ear to the head. But you need one top portion that looks nice and neat, because it is going to show up. And so doing this, feeding yarn through these loose loops, tightens them and makes them have a better finish, which is what you want. When you run out of yarn on one end, then just get your needle and use the yarn on the other end. And you're going to need one of them in order to attach. So one end you cut and the other one you leave. And you're going to use that to attach the ear to the head of the doll. All right, so here you go, and you see it's shaped nicely. It looks neat, even though it's done on a large gauge loom. There you go. Now let's do a quick inventory of parts. I'm going to get my needle, and you should have 2 arms and 2 ears and a 1 piece, which is your body. And you're going to be closing this up here at the starting at the bottom, and then going upward, and lastly at the top, and you will stuff. Now I'm going to add a pair of safety eyes, but remember that you can always just sew the eyes on. Get a measuring tool. This one is mine, by the way. They are in my store. You can find a link in the description. And I'm going to use the back part, which is in inches. So I'm going to measure from the neckline up 3 inches. You can do more or less, whatever you're comfortable with. And I'm going to do about 2.5 inches from the edge, which is where the ears are going to be. So double measure to make sure you have it right, and then go ahead and attach your eye, and measure twice, always a good idea, before you actually put the back part of the safety eyes, because they can be really hard to take off. So if you put them on wrong, it's going to be almost impossible to take it off, and you might even tear your fabric. All right, once you have them in place, go ahead and put the grommet on the back part of it, and you might need a hard surface in order to push the back part in. And then just make sure before you go ahead and make that second eye permanent, measure the first one that is now permanent before you put in the second one. All right, so there are my 2 eyes. I'm going to go ahead and put the back part of the safety eyes in. And remember, like I said, you could just get a needle and thread and sew some eyes in. You don't have to use these safety eyes, but if you do, they are 12mm eyes. We're going to start the sewing with the arms. And so get either one, and you'll notice that they curl inward, right? So what you want to do is get a hold of this seam right here on both sides, not the one that curls all the way, but the next one. And then you're going to bring the 2 sides together. So you take the drawstring and you're going to thread a needle with it, and then from the top you're going to feed that needle through those cast on loops. And you can go 2-3 times around just to make sure that you close that opening on the tip and it's nice and secure. And then we're going to start now sewing upward. And so you find those 2 stitches, one on each side, and you feed your needle through it. And then you're going to go from side to side. You're going to go up and over to the other side. And try not to tighten the thread too much, so it doesn't look bad. It'll look fine if you keep it, you know, nice and secure, but not overly tight, because it'll show that you're sewing if you make it tight, and you don't need to, you see, because the aim is to not show that you brought those 2 sides together. You want it to look like, you know, almost as if you had done the knitting in the round, right? And I'm going to continue with this beige color thread. You can change colors if you feel more comfortable. Once the hand turns from the skin tone to another color, you can just attach the other color to that skin tone color if it makes you feel more comfortable. But you can see that you don't see anything, right? It looks, you can't even tell that I did any sewing on it. And then just continue upward until you get to the top. So I got midway with the thread that I was using, so I'm going to go to the top, the bind off, and I'm going to thread the needle with that yellow yarn, the drawstring, and then I'm just going to bring the two sides together. I'm not closing this top portion, so with my needle I'm going to go to the other side and leave this open. I'm not going to close it. And you can actually here you could have started stuffing the bottom part of the arm before closing it completely. I closed it before I started putting the polyfill in, but you know, you can start from here. And I use a pair of chopsticks. Now this little portion here, I'm going to just push it into the inside. You can tie a knot with the one that you're bringing down with the yellow thread. You can connect them if you like. I'm just gonna go ahead and sew the two sides closed now with this yellow, and then just take the yellow thread and push it inside and then just leave it there. And then I'm gonna start filling it with the stuffing, with the polyfill. And like I said, I'm using a pair of chopsticks to push the stuffing down to the hand and halfway up. I'm not going to put it all the way on the top because I want the arm to be flat on the very top where I'm going to attach it to the doll. I don't want that portion to have any stuffing. So you put as much stuffing as you want, depending on how chubby you want to make your baby. And you're going to have to massage that stuffing into shape. Then you're just going to get a string with the skin tone color, right? One single strand. And you're going to wrap that around where you changed color. And that's going to give the hand a shape so that it's distinguishable from the arm, right? Make sure you tighten really nicely, and then just get your needle, or you could get a crochet hook to feed those strings out. I'm going to just use my needle and then feed those excess strings through the top, and with my scissors cut it. And that's it. And then just, you know, do the same with the other. Keep shaping your stuffing until your arm looks exactly the way you want it. Now let's work on the body, and we're going to start from the bottom up. So I had a little knot here. I'm going to take it off, and I'm going to pull on this drawstring to close this. I want it to turn into like a tube, and it might give you some resistance because there's two strands, so you might have to fight with it a little bit to get it to the shape that you want it. And then once you have it so that it's rounded out, right, like a tube, I separate the two strands and just take one. You're gonna have a hard time if you try to feed these two strands of yarn through this very tight stitch, especially right here on the tip. So then just like the arm, like the hand part, I'm going to feed that working yarn through those loops, right, in order to close that opening right there. And I go as many times as 2 to 3 times around those loops just to secure them and to make sure that it closes tight, because it's just not going to close the first time. In fact, you probably have to skip some of the loops, right, in order to make it close tighter. And as you sew, you pull on it in order to tighten the little hole that is on the tip. You see? And I did skip loops when I went to sew on the second round. And then once you do that, you can start doing just like you did with the arm. You're going to sew upward in order to close this. But I want you to keep in mind that you are going to leave some of it open on the very top part, because that's how you're going to get your stuffing into your legs, right? So don't close this one leg. I'm doing this is the right leg, depending on how you're facing. Let's say it's the first leg. You're just gonna go up to the leg, but but not there, right? You're not going to close it. You're just going to go up to that point. And then just start stuffing and sewing. Stuffing and sewing. So you see, this is the first part. Keep going. Now we're going to close the top, and remember that this is in 2 layers. So once you're happy with the shape of your doll, the body and the head, then you're going to go ahead and distinguish the 2 strands that were together from the single ones. Remember, because you're going to do the first the 2 strands which will close the top. You see here, it's the inner circle, and you want to close it as tight as you can. And then you're going to need to get a needle, so separate them because you're only going to use one of the 2, and get your needle and thread it with one of the strands. And now you're going to help close that inner opening, you're going to feed the yarn through the loops. And see, that's going to keep all your stuffing from coming out. You don't have to worry about it. And it's going to keep you from having as many wrinkles on your doll as you do. Now, if you want to have this, if you don't want to put hair on the doll, you can just do less rows, like maybe 30 instead of 35, and put more stuffing in it. I'm not so worried about the wrinkles, only because I'm going to put hair on the doll. All right, so you saw how I closed the bottom layer, which was the double. Now here's the single one, and I'm closing it as tight as I can and making a knot. But it's still a little open. It's not, there's no panic in it because the under one is completely closed. So this second layer is not a biggie, but as you can see, I skip a couple of the loops on the top of the head in order to close it really good. This is the same thing you would do with a hat, right? The same way you would close a hat using this drawstring cast off, it's the same way you're going to close the doll's head, right? And then just you're just going to cut off the excess yarn, and I leave a little because I'm going to use that as part of the hair. And then just take the longest string that you have, and you're going to use it to create a real nice tight knot right where the neckline starts to differentiate the head from the body. And you want to tighten this really, really, really tight, right? And again, my doll has a big head. I like my dolls to have big heads, but if you don't want to, just do less rows. So just do, 30 or 25 rows, and that'll just give you a smaller head. But in my case, I like them like that. Now make sure that you tie at a minimum 2 knots, if not 3. And then just cut the excess yarn, and there you have it. Now your head is separate from the body, and you can clearly tell that there's separation. And I'm going to take one of the arms. This one has the thread still on it, the strands. Some of them don't, and you might have to use some leftover strands in order to attach it. I'm going to use the drawstring that was already on it, and I'm going to use that to sew the arm on right at the top where the head meets the shoulder. And you're not going to see me do it on this video, but I do take this string to the other end and tie it to the strand that I'm going to use to attach the other arm on the other side, because you want to make sure these arms are not going to come off, right? This is not meant for like an infant or a toddler. If the toddler is very aggressive, it's a knit doll, and it can only handle so much. So you need to be careful who you're going to give it to. But nonetheless, you want to make sure that these parts are tight. And like I said, I'm going to later on take this strand that's left over, and I'm going to take it to the other side. So just put it as tight as you can. And now you see why I don't like to stuff the top, because that way it stays nice and flat. And just add your other arm, and you're good. Now let's go for the ears, and they should line up with the eyes. See right here? I go from the middle of the eye to the middle of the ear, and I get another strand, the same color as the ear. I line it up, and then I'm going to sew. And after I put in the first one, I leave some out so that I can tie a knot with the strand that was left over on the ear. I tie it to the new strand of yarn that I just put in order to attach the ear. And I'm using a metal needle. That's going to be your best bet when you're doing projects like this one. The plastic ones tend to bend, and they're problematic, and you're going to have a hard time. So if you can get a metal needle, that's actually going to be your better bet. I do have them in the store. That's not why I'm telling you it's the better bet. It just really is. They're just they're better suited for this kind of project. All right, so you want to make sure that your ear is attached well, and that you have it shaped nice enough. And when you're sewing, you want to make sure your ends are nice. And then once you're done, just take the needle in and bring it up on the top, and that's where you're going to basically weave in your ends from the top. See, that ear is on, and now you just need to attach the next ear on the other side, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to line it up with the eyes. All right, and then we want to shape the legs. So you're going to take yarn that matches the clothes and go up about I would say 2 to 3 inches, and then just like the neck, you're going to wrap it around 2 times or so, and then tighten it really tight, and make at a minimum 2 knots, and that's going to shape the foot so that it's distinguishable from the leg. And then just like with the hand, I'm going to take these loose strands, and I'm going to feed them through in order to weave them in and hide them. And then I'm going to come up on the top, and with my scissors I'm going to cut off the excess yarn. Now be careful that you don't cut the fabric when you do this, okay? You're going to do the same thing on the other side. So duplicate everything again. Now let's give Chubby a little nose, and we want to center it right in the middle between the 2 eyes and down about an inch or so. And I'm going to use 2 stitches and put this single strand of yarn, matching yarn, and then make a knot. Well, make 2 knots. Don't make them too tight, because then you'll pull on the stitches and it'll look funny. And then all you're going to do is basically wrap that knot as many times as you feel is necessary for the size that you want his nose to be. So you dictate width, and you also will dictate the thickness by the number of stitches that you use to make your nose, and the number of times that you wrap that knot. See? I wanted it to stick out a little bit, but not be, not overtake his face. So there you have it. And then I'm just going to take the yarn and bring it down to where I want his mouth to be, because I want to make like a little dent for the mouth, and then bring it back and pull it up from the top. And see how it creates a little dent? And there you have it. He is all done. Eyes, nose, mouth, ears. Yay. That's Chubby. Now, time for the next part. Oh, before I go any further, I want to say thank you, Lorena Reese, for supporting this channel. Now I need to add eyebrows. So I take the needle with some black embroidery thread, and I'm basically just going to wrap the needle with the thread around 3 or 4 stitches, and then bring it to the other side for the other eyebrow right over the eyes. And I'm just gonna wrap 2 times. As you can see, it doesn't need a lot. And then I bring the needle down because I'm going to add eyelashes. And so I do 2 sets on each eye, and I bring it over to the other one. You notice that I'm still using that same 1 strand of embroidery, and I'm gonna do the other eye, the 2 eyelashes. You can do more eyelashes if you want, or less, or no eyelashes. I like on baby dolls, even when they're little boys, I like to add eyelashes. And so once you've done that, you put it on both sides. As you can see, I push them and I shape them to make sure they look the way I want to have them. And here I'm adding a third. And then I'm going to bring the strand of yarn, of embroidery floss up to the top, and then cut the excess floss. And that's it. Eyelashes are done. And now I'm gonna get a color, like the skin tone, because I didn't feel like this was tight enough, so I'm gonna add another one to it. And you could do the same if you like, or if it came out fine, that's okay. This has to be tightened so much, and I'm not a very strong person, so sometimes I have to go back and tighten it a bit more to shape it the way I want to. And you can massage the stuffing to get it also shaped exactly how you want. Next, I'm going to give a little color to his mouth, and I'm using a light pink. And just like the nose, I'm making a knot on 1 stitch, right on where the little dent is. And now I'm going to wrap that knot just a few times, 2, 3. You don't have to put one at all, or you can make a different one. I like to make a very small one that doesn't just overtake the face. And so I'm just going to do those 2 wraps, and then bring my embroidery floss up and make a little more of a dent in it, and bring it up the top of the head and cut off the excess floss. And there you have it. That's his mouth. I'm not going to do much more than that. And then lastly, I am going to give him some hair. So I'm taking a book, and I'm going to wrap this. I think I did about 20 wraps, 20 to 25 wraps, because he's a baby, so he doesn't have like a huge amount of hair. And after I wrap that, I just pull it off the book, and I get a strand of the same color yarn and make a knot really nice and tight, and then cut off the parts that are folded, right? And I'm going to cut both ends. Like I said, it's not a lot of hair. You can do several of these and attach them if you want. I just did one. And then I'm going to thread a needle to attach this. I'm going to also, by the way, put some hot glue to finish attaching it. But right now, just to put it in place, I'm going to use my needle and some thread to position the hair where I want it, and then I'll get a glue gun and heat it up and make sure that the hair is well attached, because this doesn't necessarily keep it as well as I would like, because it's such a little bit. It's not a lot, right? It's just one round. So you can do this same thing I just did a few more times and create more pieces that you can attach to the doll. And then personally, I like them to have kind of curly hair, and so I'm going to unravel the strands of yarn, and that gives Chubby that curly kind of hair. Or you can use some kind of fancy yarn that will give him different hair. And then I like them to have some color on the cheeks, so with my own blush I add color to his cheek, which gives him a nice, cute, healthy baby look. And then he's done. I'm just going to finish unraveling his hair, and that's it. That's Chubby. Now don't forget to like, comment, and if you haven't already done so, subscribe.